just to avoid any background noise. But as we give it a few minutes for people to sign on, I welcome you to use the chat box to let us know where you're joining us from, and also if you're comfortable, maybe sharing one thing that you're grateful for this week. So we're just going to give it a couple of minutes before we kick things off. All right, we've got Ithaca, South Carolina, Worcester, West Virginia, Kalamazoo, hello, Jamestown, New York, Hudson Valley is grateful that the sun is shining. That's nice. It's not here in Boston. Wichita, Kansas, hello. Quad Cities, I'm so grateful for our staff and board. Good to hear. Tennessee, Missouri, North Texas, thankful for Wi-Fi, me too. Thankful it hasn't gone out on us yet. Got Boulder, Colorado here, that's Jeff. We have a speaker here from Boulder as well. Grateful for our community pulling together in Petoskey, Michigan. And the spring flowers are blooming in North Carolina, that's great. Just a reminder to turn off your videos for now. There'll be a chance to turn them on later when we get to the question period. Grateful everyone on staff and in family is still healthy. Yes, it's very important right now. Southwest Florida, hello. All right, so we're gonna kick things off and I'm just gonna start with a couple of housekeeping items. Like I already said, we ask that you leave your microphone and your video off while our speakers are presenting. And there will be a chance to sort of turn them on and talk to the group during our question period, but just to reduce any issues with bandwidth or sound, we ask that you leave them off for the first half of this meeting. If you are having any technical issues, please email my colleague Caroline Miranda at cmiranda@cfleads.org and she can help you troubleshoot. If we all wind up having technical issues, if Zoom isn't working, we will switch to phone and the phone number is on the screen and will also have been in the emails that you received when you registered. And if we do all have to switch to phone, Caroline will send out an email to everyone as well. But hopefully the technology works for us today and we can do this all via Zoom. So to kick things off, I'm going to turn it over to Deborah Elwood, just to say a few words about why we're hosting these webinars and sort of the important moment that we're in and the roles that we all have to play.
Hello, everyone, and hello from Hawaii. I have decided to go work in Hawaii for the next month or so. And it's a little awkward wearing the winter garb that I am, but anyway, it's nice to be visiting you actually from Boston with Hawaii in the background. So anyway, welcome to our second webinar in the CF Leads new webinar series, Community Connections in Times of Crisis. We had a really positive response to our first webinar last week, and many of you are back again today, so thanks for joining us. We know how important it is to create community among community foundations as you are rapidly working to address the consequences of this extraordinary worldwide public health crisis that continues to unfold in front of us. As we discussed last week, this forum is for community foundations who want to come together to swap stories and to share strategies and to just support each other. We're particularly interested and really focused on how you're exercising your community leadership muscle at this time. These continue to be very difficult and demanding times. You know the data. There is no sugarcoating it. Several 100,000 COVID-19 cases right now, and it looks like over 5,000 deaths, and with projections from public health experts that the death toll could be in the several hundred thousands in the United States. Meanwhile, we learned today that weekly jobless claims hit 6.6 million last week. This is absolutely stunning and double last week's numbers and among the worst ever. You simply as human beings are bearing the emotional toll like every other human being, while you're also shepherding your community foundation through these incredible uncharted waters. I'll share my video again here. But thank goodness for community foundations. Already, according to Candid, which is tracking this information, hundreds of you have created funds, and often in partnership with other funders. Flexible, unrestricted resources are needed now, and many of you are already delivering, setting up all kinds of systems while working from home to get money out the door while still ensuring appropriate checks and balances. It's really pretty stunning how quickly you've responded. And we heard in our last webinar that we're seeing community foundations arrange their grant making and really directing all of your strategies to be focused on the most vulnerable among us. And this is critically important, as we know, because the inequities that are facing low-income families are being laid bare. Importantly, though, I would say many of you are not assuming that you know what your community needs. Your past relationships will certainly take you a very long way, and you'll hear some of that from our speakers today. But we're seeing those of you going back to those trusted relationships to check in and see what is needed now and to not make any assumptions. And both Chris Barge, one of our speakers, and Bridget Wilkinson will address this a bit. Note also that the Center for Effective Philanthropy has created a modified grantee survey that could be useful now too. But it's also not too soon to be thinking about the longer term, about what's needed to create long-term improvements in people's lives, recognizing that grant dollars are necessary, but not sufficient to solve the problems we face today. So like last week, you know, what's absolutely clear is this is no time to step back. Community foundations, which exist in hundreds of US communities from coast to coast and many more around the world, are unique civic institutions with community betterment missions. You have so many tools to bring to the table, and you are full of passionate, knowledgeable, skilled staff, board members, and donors who really understand and love your communities. You are there for your community, and you're really in a truly privileged place to help. So I would like to introduce our two speakers today. At each, as we mentioned last time, at each of these Community Connection webinars, we'll do three things. First, we'll hear from colleagues across the country, from community foundations of all different sizes, from all different locations, from some that are experiencing the COVID-19 crisis early on, from some who are just experiencing it now, some who are more rural, some who are more urban. All of you are dealing with this in some way, shape, or form. So that's the first thing we'll hear from, is a few colleagues from across the country. Then we will facilitate questions and a conversation as best we can with the technology. We had quite a lot of success last time. And the reason we're using Zoom is because we're really trying to create a community so that we can hear your voices, see yourselves on camera if you're willing to do that, because this is about community. And then finally, we'll close out with a story or a poem that'll bring you just a little bit piece of peace in these demanding times. And we're seeing virtual dance parties and virtual happy hours at various community foundations. So we hope that this is one other thing that helps strengthen your mental health. So let me first introduce Chris Barge, who's the Vice President for Strategic Initiatives at the Community Foundation for Boulder County. He has done a number of really important projects there. One was creating and now spinning off a Latino parent engagement program. He also has directed their trends report, which has been a really exemplary report on the social and economic health of Boulder County. He joined the foundation in 2008 after a decade of working in the newspaper business. So he really has brings a journalism bent to this work. So he'll speak to Boulder's response to the crisis and how they are really engaging residents, advancing equity, and supporting the not-for-profit sector in unique ways. So Chris, welcome.
Hey everybody, reporting live from my attic in Boulder, Colorado. It's nice to be with you all. Thanks for bringing those slides up. That's a picture from yesterday. This is home learning with the kids. We are, obviously, schools are shut down. We are thankful, my wife and I, as camp counselors of our kids, to have the help of about 4 hours of curriculum now. But we're here to talk today about our community foundation's response, and the theme, I think, is building connections and solving problems, all while working from home. So let's dive right in. Just a little bit of context to orient you. We serve Boulder County. It's a population of about 323,000 people across 13 cities and towns in north central Colorado. Next slide. And indeed, March was not on our 2020 work plan. I mean, just in February, our team was talking about our plans for the year. It involved the census, lots of exciting things with the trends report, grant making, and then here we go. It's been a busy few weeks. We opened a COVID-19 response fund Boulder County on March 13th. By the 16th, we were working remotely. By the 20th, we had $120,000 in grants out the door. And by March 26th, we were holding virtual group hugs to help the executive directors and CEOs of our nonprofits connect with each other and just stay still for a minute after all this whiplash. And then on March 27th, we launched a new feature out of our Trends project called Trends Diary that I'll get into all this in more detail in a minute. So everybody is feeling a little frayed around the edges at the moment, but also feeling glad to have meaningful work at a time of crisis in our community. So I mentioned we opened the COVID-19 Response Fund Boulder County. Its purpose is to ensure essential services for community members who find themselves at the intersection of being most vulnerable to the virus and most impacted by inequity. This is aligned with our vision of equity, and we're really following our values and our principles. We have a three-pronged approach at our community foundation. We stand with the vulnerable and marginalized. We do nothing about us without us, resident leadership. And then finally, we believe we can accomplish more together than alone. The first $120,000 were put into process last week, and another round, likely of around $150,000, is going to go out next week. We just got the update this morning at our morning meeting that we're approaching the $1 million mark as far as dollars raised. Okay, next slide. I mentioned this virtual group hug. This was something that a few years ago Jeff had put together with some nonprofits that serve various vulnerable populations that were experiencing a big surge as far as marginalized groups being really under attack. So this time they took that same idea with the current crisis, and they said, well, if we can't meet in person, let's at least put a Zoom meeting together. And we worked with a local partner called Social Venture Partners, which has chapters across the country, the one for Boulder County. And so we worked with them. They agreed to help facilitate. And so last week, what we did is we said, look, this is just for the purpose of sharing stories of solution and connection, to build emotional support, and to reinforce that we're all in this together. So sign up for a Zoom, and we'll cap it at 10 CEOs. and we'll open more as demand warrants. And they sold out real quick and had hour-long lunchtime conversations, 2 last week, 1 so far this week, another's happening later this afternoon. They've all sold out. Maybe we'll open more. But it's just a small way that that we can help convene them and just offer a confidential space. In fact, Jeff Hirota, who's on this webinar right now, welcomes everyone, and then he says, just so that you can speak freely and confidentially, I'm going to jump off the call. Not to mention the fact that he's working around the clock 7 days a week and could use the time. Okay, next slide.
Chris, there was a request to have you repeat the goals for the group hugs.
Oh, sure. So just to state what's on that slide, I mean, the goals of the group hug are to share stories of solution and connection, to build emotional support, and to just reinforce that we're all in this together. There really is no agenda, and that's why it's been helpful to have a staff member of Social Venture Partners. Their program director has stayed on the call to help facilitate the conversation. So that these CEOs who are really cross-cutting, we're not clumping them according to what area of interest they serve, but really just recognizing that they are in an incredibly stressful position trying to keep their organizations afloat and in service to the community. So no agenda other than to connect about perhaps cross-cutting best practices that are emerging, but really just a time to check in, say, how's it going? This is unprecedented. We're all in this together. Okay, next slide. Another initiative that wasn't on our work plan, but that we went ahead and launched, and it went from ideation to creation in about a week, is something we're calling Trends Diary. I'm kind of a junkie of the New York Times Metropolitan Diary, which has existed as long as I've been alive. It was started in 1976, and this is sort of modeled after that. We're inviting all Boulder County residents of all ages to submit stories that speak to stories of connection and problem solving. Now during this time of increased physical isolation. We've so far been doing some proactive outreach to collect the first stories. This is a picture here on this slide of Giovanni Hernandez Pena with his parents. He's a first generation college student who was very, very frustrated when they closed down the CU Boulder campus. He had just transferred this year. He's majoring in civil engineering, and he goes to campus normally and spends 80 hours a week there, including all day on the weekends. And as he says, he understands everything so clearly and quickly in Spanish, but in his second language that he only started learning in 7th grade when his family moved back to our area from Mexico, it's so much harder. And so he depends on those in-person interactions, the office hours, the interaction with students, the tutoring. But in his essay, he talks about the ways that he has patched this together remotely, and that the silver lining has been more time to spend with his family, including helping them with the little problems that come up, like when they're being overcharged for their cell phone service and neither of them speak English. He's able to go with his parents to the phone store and iron that out. So the Trends Diary debuted with our local partner, our community radio station, KGNU. I hosted a half-hour-long show with one of the first diarists, and KGNU has agreed to reformat what we have in writing and on video into audio files that they would drop in on a weekly basis. And we've also mobilized a couple of local reporters that we've worked with in the past on our Trends Report. And the hope is that they will be able to generate high-quality content. These are all short takes, 200 to 300 words in writing, or else it's a 1-minute video that's shareable on Instagram. And the idea is that every week on KGNU, it'll be sort of like NPR's StoryCorps. But these are all, what they have in common is they're short and they're poignant and they're first-person accounts of making connections and solving problems in this time of physical isolation. Okay, next slide. And that's it. So looking forward to the conversation and to hearing from our colleague Bridget in Bozeman.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very, very much. And we'll get to questions after Bridget speaks. Hello, Bridget.
Hi.
Nice to see you. Bridget's told us she's got snow on the ground, not the nice sand and waves that I've got here in Boston. But in any case, Bridget is the executive director of the Bozeman Area Community Foundation. She's the foundation's first executive director and joined in 2013, right, Bridget?
Yeah, correct.
She's really passionate about strengthening Bozeman area's social fabric, literally one conversation at a time as they're just getting started. And that's what she'll be talking about today, and sharing the power of her cross-sector relationships. So thanks, Bridget.
Great. Thank you,
Welcome.
Deborah. I really appreciate it. It is absolutely an honor to be here. As Deborah mentioned, I'm Bridget Wilkinson, Executive Director of the Bozeman Area Community Foundation, headquartered in Bozeman, Montana, and serving southwestern Montana. As you'll learn from my slide, I'm also a lot of other roles at the Community Foundation that I have listed here. I'm sure that some of you can relate to that. So to give you a sense of where I'm calling from today, it's pretty darn spectacular. We live in a place that is most people's vacation, and we're very grateful. But in all seriousness, I was very humbled when I was asked to speak today. Many of you on the call are my Community Foundation superheroes, who I've reached out to over the years and have been a big resource for us. So I hope today I can give back a little bit to the sector that has definitely given so much to us in our organization, and to share with you a little bit about our corner of the world. So today my goal is to provide you with a perspective about how One Community Foundation is using our community leadership work to support rural America during COVID-19 crisis. In the next few minutes, I will explore our response to COVID-19 through our power of relationships, our cross-sector response, and the ways that we're supporting our community outside of grant making. As I mentioned, as was mentioned last week on our webinar series with CF Leads, if your phone is ringing off the hook right now as a community foundation, you've been doing something right. And I am just trying to keep that in perspective, that our workload is really heavy right now, but it feels like such a gift that we are right on track with where hopefully our community needs us right now. So first, let me tell you briefly about who we are as an organization and where we're located. I think this matters, as you'll see, because this matters because as you'll see, our size and how we've grown our community foundation through our community leadership work are an important part of our story that brings us to the COVID-19 crisis today. So let's start at the beginning. I was hired in 2013, as Deborah mentioned, as a part-time staff member at the Bozeman Area Community Foundation. And previously, our organization was a board-led entity. And on my first day, I was given a box of binders and an account number for a small endowment fund. And the board member said, Bridget, welcome to the team. Now go build this thing. So we've done just that with many community partners and dedicated volunteers and board members. I have the privilege of telling this story today, but the story is really a confluence of many people throughout the years. I'm simply one of them. So while we're a small community foundation, we're a mighty community foundation that is growing quickly. So to give you a snapshot of our team, our staff is now 2.5 employees. To many of you, this might not seem like a big deal, but I just hired my third staff person, a finance and ops person, and I tell you what, I feel like I hit the lottery. It's also important to note that we have 3 fantastic office dogs who function as a great support team as well. So a little Montana pro tip, that you must always mention your dogs. Basically, there are more dogs than people in our state. And our assets are just under 2 million. However, we've been able to galvanize more than 4 million in additional support for our local nonprofits through our community leadership work over the past 6 years. So now let's talk about the place that we get the privilege of serving. So Gallatin County in southwestern Montana is large and diverse. It features everything from the spectacular scenery of Yellowstone National Park to lush farmlands to world-class downhill skiing to blue ribbon trout streams and a growing economy of a high-tech industry. We're home to skiers and outdoor enthusiasts, wildlife watchers, business owners, ranchers, vacationers, retirees, and students. It's important to note that the region we serve is large geographically, with one densely populated area of the city of Bozeman, where we're headquartered. while the remainder of our county is largely unincorporated areas and smaller rural communities. So to give you a sense of size, like imagine if Delaware and Rhode Island had a baby and were combined, you would get Gallatin County, which is our service area. So while our region is large, our county really functions as one long main street. So while the main urban area of the city of Bozeman is the fastest growing micropolitan in the US right now, as we've mentioned, the rest of our county is very rural. So as a result, cross-sector collaboration is perhaps the norm and not the exception when addressing community issues in Montana. And as history has shown us in Montana, in order to survive, you needed your neighbors, and that long history continues to be exemplified here today. Often your mayor or your city commissioner is just one phone call away, and there is extraordinary accessibility to leadership and decision makers here. With that being said, because our region is also home to many different municipalities that are interconnected by economy and population, there can also be some territorial issues and jealousies, which I'm sure many of you can relate to in that. And so while our COVID-19 response is certainly presenting new demands and requiring us to pivot in ways that we serve our community, it doesn't really represent a deviation from our current role that we play in the county. So while we're certainly working to grow our assets under management and our ability to put capital to work in our community, we have a long-standing belief that we are a tool for maximizing any contribution of time, of talents, of treasures, of ties that any community member wants to make this place special. So without a lot of financial capital to bring to the table, we have focused on building our social and political capital by building trust, one cup of coffee at a time. So we built trust by being authentic in our work, by doing what we say we are going to do, and not being afraid to learn in public and to admit our failures. Our mantra at our community foundation is to strive to simply be the best listener in the room. And so as a result of this, we've become the convener and connector across our region. So for example, because of the trust that we have worked hard to earn, we were able to get high-level government participation on our COVID-19 Relief Fund grant-making committee. Additionally, we were able to include some respected nonprofit leaders to this group without there really being a question of whether or not the process would be fair by having them represented. So currently, we're engaging across sectors on 3 fronts for our COVID-19 relief. The first, similarly to many of you, is our relief fund that was launched in partnership with our Greater Gallatin United Way and is supported by government and business leaders, funders, and nonprofits across a 4-county region. Many of these leaders are decision makers on the front lines of organizations, and they're able to bring their decision-making acumen and their knowledge of local needs to our team to expedite our relief grant making. It's also important to note that we, similarly to what Deborah said, we don't assume that we know what these needs are, and so that's really where these partnerships have become very helpful. Secondly, our local COAD, or Community Organization Active in Disaster Relief Committee, is made up of businesses, governments, and nonprofits as well. This group has an important pulse on the urgent needs right now. Many of these participants are on the front lines of relief work, from providing childcare to first responders to trying to figure out housing for displaced low-income individuals in our region after our warming center was closed due to COVID-19. And finally, our work on small business relief and SBA loans has included local banks, nonprofits, and government agencies across the county. As we know, our small local banks will be getting slammed with requests for SBA loans, and so we're working alongside many of these partners to help streamline this process for them. And so as we mentioned from the beginning, we don't have a lot of financial capital to bring to the table, and this is changing, and we're growing our assets quickly. However, I used to believe that our asset size was a weakness, and now I really view it as our superpower, because it allows us to focus on building our community foundation by being nimble and creative and honestly not beholden to a 100-year legacy. We have built our organization on our community leadership work. And so while there's been pros and cons to this path, as you can imagine, it's really prepared us for this time right now, because we've been building strong connections by working alongside community leaders in our region through prior initiatives, such as our Seat at the Table initiative in 2018. That was a one-day community conversation initiative modeled after the On the Table program, hosted by the Chicago Trust. A Seat at the Table was designed to bring people together throughout our region in small mealtime conversations for the purpose of brainstorming innovative solutions to address their community's most pressing needs. And so these needs were then provided to city and county leaders, and also informed our grant making process moving forward. And because of our community leadership work through initiatives like A Seat at the Table, it was natural for these leaders to turn to us and ask us to help identify needs, to marshal resources, and to get information out the door. We've also, we've already been their partner before this crisis hit, and so they knew that they could trust us in this work. Additionally, we have some deep connections with our nonprofit sector through our regular programming that we've had for years, like our nonprofit cafe and our annual giving day that I'll talk about. And because of this role, I think we were immediately seen as the go-to resource for information and for moral support by our nonprofit leaders. So don't get me wrong, I absolutely recognize that financial resources are critical to our communities right now. And while we're raising those resources through our crisis fund and in partnership with our donor advised funds, we know that there are many other ways that we are helping our community through this challenging time. And so as a small community foundation, all of our programming has really originated from grassroots collaborative efforts, because as you have seen, we don't have a lot of staff and capacity to do otherwise. So because we didn't have a lot of financial resources, we've had to be really creative as to how we've added value to our community and supported our nonprofit sector. So as a result, we have some low-cost programming that has really moved the needle for our sector through education and support of our community leaders, and these programs are really showing their value now. So while most of these programs are very low cost, outside of buying a cup of coffee, obviously the hard costs are staff time, but a couple of the programs I wanted to share with you today. So the first is actually really similar to Boulder's virtual group hug. It's called our Executive Director Roundtable. So over the years, we've convened executive directors, volunteer directors, and development directors through small conversations. So each month we bring these affinity groups of professionals together to talk about the unique challenges facing their role. Often there's a loose topic to focus our time, but the conversations usually unfold pretty naturally and requires very little moderation by me. So this month we actually moved our Executive Director Roundtable to Zoom. And normally we have a good showing for this group, but this month we had nearly 70 leaders join us online. So we're learning that in this time of isolation, very similarly to Boulder, nonprofit leaders are hungry to hear from each other, especially from their peers, and to receive support from them. So now they've asked us to host these conversations on a weekly basis, and we are happy to do so. Secondly, we have a program called our Nonprofit Cafe, which happens each month, where we bring nonprofit leaders together and provide coffee, chairs, and free professional development for them. So each topic is a different professional development topic, ranging from fundraising to improv to recruiting and retaining good board members. Some are more advanced than others, but our secret goal of the program is to really provide space for nonprofit leaders to meet each other and to find synergy as a sector, and more importantly, to not feel alone in their work. So obviously the cost of this program is coffee and our staff time. But today we've pivoted our content to really address the most pressing issues for our nonprofits in light of COVID-19. And we've recorded these and we're able to share them at a later time for nonprofit leaders. So for example, we're focusing a lot of effort right now on the understanding of and support in applying for federal aid and loans. And then the third low-cost program that has seen a big return on investment is our Facebook group. So we created and have moderated a Facebook group for nonprofit leaders in the region. This is really casual, but it provides really good moral support for a population that might be feeling even more removed from their community and purpose due to social distancing. So finally, as I wrap up today, I was asked to speak to any policy opportunities that have come up through the crisis, and we've been working on sustainable housing solutions as the most pressing issue before our community. And this was identified during our Seat at the Table initiative last year. The cost of housing in our region is extraordinarily high, and we often have many second home owner properties in our valley. And so we've decided to continue to pursue this work throughout the crisis as the need is even more apparent and urgent in light of COVID-19. So being largely a service-based economy with a strong dependence on tourism and hospitality, many of our residents are one paycheck away from being unable to pay their rent. And while there are now federal programs in place to help through the COVID pandemic, the reality is that not all economic downturns or personal circumstances will be supported through this federal relief programs. And that means that many members of our community are at risk of homelessness all the time. So we are a part of a coalition of organizations, banks, and government agencies working to promote, explain, and increase local applications and access to the available federal relief funding and protection. And it's important to note that in Montana, there's a strong value being placed on being self-reliant here, as well as a long-standing cultural aversion to engaging with the federal government in many of our longtime residents. And so many pre-existing federal aid programs for things like food support have been under access by those eligible in Montana, making it not only acceptable, but the right thing to do for our community to apply for relief to keep businesses open and people employed is part of the messaging that we're currently working on. So over the past few weeks, I've learned 3 things that have become really vital in our work. First, to be the best listener in the meetings that you're sitting in on right now. That will help you best determine when it's important to lead, to follow, or to convene. Deep listening will allow you to make more informed decisions. You don't have to have all the answers right now. During this time of chaos and disconnect, people need to feel heard, your grantees, your donors, and your staff. Hal Saunders once said, listen deeply enough so that you might be changed by what you hear. Right now, our communities do need action, but they also need really good listeners that can help chart the best path forward. Secondly, don't be afraid to fail and to learn in public. Things are changing by the minute, and remember that you are making the best decisions you can with the information that you have at any given time. So we'd all do things differently if we could have planned for this pandemic or this relief process, but time is simply not a luxury that we all have. And so you're going to fail along the way. And this is hard for me. I'm a perfectionist who wants to have the right answer and the best plan of attack. But be transparent and be honest and be willing to learn in public. As a result, I think people will learn to trust you on an even deeper level and realize that you're human as well. And then finally, my last takeaway and piece of advice for all of you is to just take care of yourself and your staff right now. As we've discussed on this call, this is an ultra marathon and not a sprint. Each Monday, I have my staff set goals, 3 goals about how they're going to take care of themselves that week. And so during our Thursday check-ins, I ask them if they've achieved these goals, because we know that what gets measured gets done. And our staff, they're all working so tremendously hard right now to serve our community. So it's important that we are good role models of self-care and encourage that of your staff. So that's it. That's all I got. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Bridget. And thanks to you too, Chris. I mean, what incredibly inspiring stories of work in less populated places who may have been getting hit by the virus a little bit later than some of the hot spots. So what we'd like you to do is put any questions you may have into the chat box. And also raise your hand if you would like to ask on video. So if you're willing to ask a question on video, raise your hand and we'll get to that. And let me see here. So there was one question that I'll direct to both you. First, I guess I'll start with you, Chris. And it's about what your relationship is with United Way. And Bridget, you talked about that a little bit, but if you could address that question as well. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, so we have a particular transition happening in our United Way constellation locally. About a year ago, we had a United Way that was particularly serving our county that folded in with the Denver Regional Mile High United Way, which is the nation's oldest United Way. And so we've been working to reset that relationship. They focus on the 7-county area. we've got a very good relationship with them. In fact, they office in our building, which we own. And I think that our CEO, Jeff Hirota, who I know is listening in right now, has probably been working most closely with them on the state level as he's been advising the statewide fund in response. So while we've also been, in addition to working with United Way, in touch with a local funders collaborative focusing in our county that includes our county, which is actually the biggest funder of local nonprofits, and our municipalities. We have another couple of smaller local community foundations within our county, also that are part of that collaborative. But yes, we are doing our best to follow our value of accomplishing more together than alone.
Bridget, anything to add?
Yeah, I would just say it's been interesting because I would say previous or prior to maybe 2 weeks ago, we didn't really have a working strong relationship with our United Way. And I wouldn't say that there was tension between our United Way. We just really didn't collaborate on a lot of things. And so interestingly, we're talking 3 times a day now, which I think is actually a real gift. And so I'm grateful for this opportunity to learn the ropes in terms of collaborating with them through this, that hopefully will spur additional collaborations moving forward.
Great. So Phil Hansen, you have a question about the SBA loans. Did you want to ask that of the speakers and put yourself on audio and or video and ask that question? Phil, are you there? Philip Hansen?
I'm here. Sorry.
Great.
I was just sorry. I was actually
Tell us where you're from. Tell us where you're from, Philip.
I'm in Independence, Missouri with the Truman Heartland Community Foundation. So
Wonderful. Welcome.
one of the things that we're trying to get out to our nonprofits in the community is the information about the payment protection or payroll protection program, the SBA loans that nonprofits are eligible to apply for. In fact, we're looking as our community foundation about figuring out how to make an application for that. So I just wanted to know if others are doing the same or have any suggestions on how we can make sure those nonprofits, particularly ones that are seeing their finances dramatically impacted, how we can help them survive. We can't do it all through philanthropy, and that program's out there, and we need to make sure our nonprofits are taking advantage of it.
Great. So Chris, it sounds like you might have a way to respond. And also, if anyone else has responses, you can respond to Phil in the chat box. We're happy to have you chattering away underneath all this while this is going on. So Chris.
Phil, thank you. This is a super hot topic in our county as well. We've got nonprofits clamoring for more information about the payroll protection program that has been expanded under the CARES Act just passed by Congress, the $2.2 trillion package. We're tracking this. We intend to have a communication out to our local nonprofits in the next, I think by tomorrow. I think that the final advice on this is still being clarified, and that local banks, many of whom already deal with SBA loans for small businesses, are going to have final advisement by April 11th. And so this is really a matter of saying, we hear all your questions. Here are all the links that we have about various opinions. And I think our role right now can be distilling the information, saying we're tracking it, and promising to get the relevant, most timely information out to our local nonprofits possible.
Great. Thanks. Bridget?
Yeah, and I would definitely echo what Craig mentioned. I think one way that we are approaching this is, I think some of this work with SBA loans is pretty complicated. And so what we've done is try to reach out to community partners that are really experts in this work and curate opportunities for our nonprofits to learn about it. So last Friday, we hosted our virtual nonprofit cafe that I had mentioned, and we hosted an unemployment attorney to speak to unemployment issues right now. We had our local Prospera Business Network speak to these SBA loans and federal loan opportunities. And then we had our statewide nonprofit association talk about different legislation that's coming down the pipe that affects them. So I think the reality is that sometimes we can't be experts in all of this, but I think curating opportunities for those experts to come to the table and reduce barriers for nonprofits to be able to access those experts, I think is one way that we can really lean in right now.
Great, thank you, Bridget. And you can see there's quite a good chat going on about Council of Nonprofits. Had a great webinar. I heard that was really good. There's some other things that are referenced here for anyone who's interested. Does anyone else have any questions? I think there are some others that we heard earlier. So Chris, how long have you had this sort of North Star or fundamental principle of kind of being of, by, and for the community in which you serve, sort of the do nothing about us without us? And how has that affected the way you're dealing with this crisis?
Well, Deborah, thank you for being along with us on that journey. It really began, I don't know how long ago it was. Was it 5 years ago that we were part of the cohort? What's that?
I think about that, yeah.
Yeah, about that. You all with the Aspen Institute led a cohort for a year of learning on the value of resident engagement and the call that you were really making for that to emerge in our field. We took it seriously. At first, we iterated it out through our Latino Parent Engagement Program, which has since rolled outside of our foundation, gotten its independence as a nonprofit, and has doubled in size, and it's doing really well. We took that value to heart, and under Jeff's leadership during his last 3 years as CEO, I think about a year and a half ago, we finally, maybe it was just last summer, I'll ask Jeff who's on the call to correct me. Anyway, we ratified it as our formal North Star would be equity and nothing about us without us, and standing with vulnerable and marginalized, and doing more together than alone, became our approach. That's really been helpful to me as I've worked on various initiatives, to know when we're either asked to engage with something or when we're thinking about how we might engage with a certain population or a topic area, to understand that we're guided by those principles helps us and others in the community know when and how we show up.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful. Bridget, you said that you are sort of feeling validated in that you have gotten a lot of questions, or your phone's been ringing. Who's been calling you?
That's a great question. I'm going to answer this really honestly. I think some of the people that have called have really surprised me. Some of the people that have called are people that we have been really interested in working with as local philanthropists in the area that have reached out to us saying, hey, what are you working on? What do you know? How can we help support you in that? So I will say, as I mentioned, not having a lot of financial capital to come to bring to the table, I think that is feeling good that these people with pretty significant capacity are wanting to partner with us on their philanthropy right now, and hopefully for the long term. Some of the other calls that we have been fielding have been from city and county leaders, just about being able to help them coordinate efforts and coordinate conversations that maybe maybe it just feels better to have us be the convener of those conversations versus them. And I think we're also hearing from nonprofit leaders right now who, as I mentioned in my presentation, just really want to tell us their story. They're hurting and they're scared, and they have a lot of responsibility on their shoulders. And so part of the calls that we're fielding are honestly just listening and just trying to be empathetic. And so I think that those are some of the main phone calls outside of kind of the coordinating work that we're doing. But I will say that we've been surprised at some of the people that have come out of the woodwork to reach out to us, but feeling very grateful. But I will say that we have also proactively been reaching out to others in this time in terms of coordinating different funders in the region and different municipalities. So I think the conversations are going both ways right now.
That's really interesting. I mean, it's, as you say, city leaders, donors, and not-for-profits are all seeing you as a trusted source to go to. And, it's really interesting that you've taken this approach of you're going to be first about listening and being supportive to your community, and then donors come to you for that. So they are seeing you as that, and that's what they want. And that just reflects back on the Center for Effective Philanthropy survey from several years ago now, where it says that what donors want to be part of is an organization that they believe is really making a difference. And these phone calls, I think, are just proving that for you. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope so. And I think just harkens to what you said earlier, that we never should assume that we know all the answers or what the needs are. And I think that's where, as community foundations, where we can play that cross-sector role, I think can really lend itself well to moments like this.
Right, great. Well, let's take one more question here. And let's see if I can get your name here. Is it Sandy? Or is it, let me see if I'm in the right place. Curious, it says, who did the curious? Let's see, sorry, I'm having trouble moving my cursor here.
Yep, it's Sandy.
Is it Sandy? Sandy Scanelli, do you want to ask your question about have anyone raised or any holdback funds? If you want to get on your audio and possibly your video and ask Chris and Bridget that question. It sounds like it's also going on a conversation in the chat.
Yes, can you hear me?
Sure can hear you. Yep. Welcome.
Okay, great. Thank you. I was just curious, is anyone considering with the funds that they're raising, holding back some of those for more post-COVID recovery? And one of the things I was wondering about with all the fundraising that's going on right now, will folks develop a kind of a crisis or fundraising fatigue that may slow down the donations for that post-recovery or post-COVID recovery period when it may be needed most? Just curious about planning.
Chris?
Yeah, we're in alignment with a lot of thinkers across our state of Colorado on this one, and we're thinking about this in terms of 3 phases. Generally, right now, we consider ourselves in a prevention phase. As we get more into the peak of the crisis and there are more and more people sick with COVID-19, we're going to call that the intervention phase. And then as we look at all of what's left in the wake of all this crisis economically and on down, we're going to talk about that phase as recovery. And so the thing is, we have that understanding as a framework, and we also know that any kind of disaster response, a foundation is looked to handle money like a hot potato. And so we really are trying to demonstrate that we're pushing money out the door quickly by getting grants out the door within a week of opening the fund and getting a second tranche out within 2 weeks of that. We were just on a call this morning talking about that dilemma, however. So while we are generally trying to think in terms of a third, we also want to think about how we are an instrument for community action. It's up to the community how they respond to this. It's not up to us to decide that there's a fundraising phase and then a grant making phase. This all needs to be fluid, and we also need to be strategic and smart about it. So it's an art more than a science. There are the values of getting the money out quickly. And certainly we've got to be mindful that there are 2 phases yet to come. And we won't really know until this is all over when those phases really did occur.
Thank you, Chris. That's really helpful. So we're just about at time. And before I turn this over to Len to share a poem that I think is really, really relevant to all of you and to all the optimists that you are, I wanted to mention that for next week, we have one speaker lined up, Judith Bell, who I think her title is the Chief Impact Officer at the San Francisco Foundation. And they're doing some early thinking about what some of their big policy goals and policy levers would be, as they are also, of course, managing a fund and doing sort of emergency response. There will be others, and in the future, we hope to hear from some folks from New Orleans about what they learned about Katrina and how that is shaping what they are doing now. So I think I will turn it over to Len Bartel on our team to sign us out with this poem that I hope provides you with some inspiration today. Thanks so much, everybody. It's really wonderful that you're all able to participate, and we look forward to gathering with you next Thursday at the same time. Take care, and here's the poem.
Len, you're on mute.
Len?
Can you hear me?
Now we can. Yep, there we go.
Deborah?
Yep, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. I don't know what the problem there was. Okay. So the title of this poem is Gate A4. And while this is written within the context of a crowded airport where none of us are these days, you can imagine this being in your community. This is by Naomi Shahib Nye, and about trying to connect across difference in times of crisis. Wandering around the Albuquerque airport terminal, after learning my flight had been delayed 4 hours, I heard an announcement. If anyone in the vicinity of Gate A4 understands any Arabic, please come to the gate immediately. Well, one pauses these days. Gate A4 was my own gate. I went there. An older woman in full traditional Palestinian embroidered dress, just like my grandma wore, was crumpled to the floor wailing. Help, said the flight agent. Talk to her. What is her problem? We told her the flight was going to be late, and she did this. I stooped to put my arm around the woman and spoke haltingly. Shudawa, shubid uk habibti, stani shwe min fadlik shubit siwi. The minute she heard any word she knew, however poorly used, she stopped crying. She thought the flight had been canceled entirely. She needed to be in El Paso for major medical treatment the next day. I said, no, we're fine. You'll get there, just later. Who is picking you up? Let's call him. We called her son. I spoke with him in English. I told him I would stay with his mother till we got on the plane and ride next to her. She talked to him. Then we called her other sons, just for the fun of it. Then we called my dad, and he and she spoke for a while in Arabic and found out, of course, they had 10 shared friends. Then I thought, just for the heck of it, why not call some Palestinian poets I know and let them chat with her? This all took up to 2 hours. She was laughing a lot by then, telling of her life, patting my knee, answering questions. She had pulled a stack of homemade mamoul cookies, little powdered sugar crumbly mounds stuffed with dates and nuts, from her bag, and was offering them to all the women at the gate. To my amazement, not a single woman declined one. It was like a sacrament. The traveler from Argentina, the mom from California, lovely woman from Laredo. We were all covered with the same powdered sugar and smiling. There's no better cookie. And then the airline broke out free apple juice from huge coolers, and 2 little girls from our flight ran around serving it, and they were covered with powdered sugar too. I noticed my new best friend, by now we were holding hands, had a potted plant poking out of her bag. Some medicinal thing with green furry leaves. Such an old country tradition. Always carry a plant, always stay rooted to somewhere. And I looked around the gate of late and weary ones, and I thought, this is the world I want to live in. The shared world, not a single person in that gate, once the crying of confusion stopped, seemed apprehensive about any other person. They took the cookies. I wanted to hug all those other women too. This can still happen anywhere. Not everything is lost.
Thank you, everyone, and we hope to see you next week. Thanks, Len. Bye-bye, everybody.
You.